And now let's talk about the Darwin. Okay, so super easy. Who wrote the book of the origin of the species? So the answer will be Darwin. So he wrote this book. Definitely, Galton is not who wrote the origin of the species. He actually was inspired to write a different book. He wrote the application of the origins of the species of the natural selection in humans, and he focused on the heredity of genius. And later we will talk about this very controversial book and how he knew so much about the statistic, but he was really good, but it ended up creating a lot of problems of pseudoscience, as we will talk in following classes, and why I have here Galton and Darwin close because they were members of the same family. Actually, the Galton admired Darwin a lot, and as I said, Galton found inspiration in the work of Darwin, so he wrote his own book. So this is the book, and I might ask you a question like that later, but Galton is not the right answer. And Lamarck also wrote a book that has this name, that it was not related to the origin of the species. So definitely the only possible answer was Darwin. This one is another easy question. The theory of evolution by natural selection was independently developed by, and here super easy question. These two guys, as we watch in the videos, and if you read the Campbell biology, you know that both almost independently, or let's say both independently, they study different parts of the world. They came with the same idea, although Darwin published earlier. Both have very similar ideas, and all the other answers, they were people that they inspired these two authors, Darwin and Wallace, to have their ideas, such as we say, Lamarck, Malthus, Lyell, Cuvier. All these people inspire the theory of evolution through natural selection, but and they were not the one who developed that idea. So, for example, Lamarck is wrong. This one is wrong. This one is wrong, and this guy is wrong. And here is the dad of Darwin, that he was not involved in that. And the only possible answer is B. Okay, now let's answer some additional questions. Okay, here. So the idea of question mark that nature select, and this is very important, from existing variation to those species that are best adapted to their environment. So we have to see which is the idea that proposed this, that nature select. So definitely the acquired traits is not. Later I will show you why B and C are wrong, and that the only option is natural selection. So very easy, natural selection. So if you have any doubt about this, go to the Campbell biology and read in detail the chapter, because this is actually one of the definition of natural selection. And let me show you an example. So for example, if we have variation, so we will have some birds, as the ones, the finches that Darwin described, and some of them will have different sizes in their beak, and as a result, there will be some that will be best adapted to their environment. Yeah, so for example, this one will survive. Why? Because the beak is longer, so it will allow it to eat this tiny worm there. So again, So the nature select, and the one that survive will be the one that are best adapted, like this guy. And how why they changed, because there was variation in the species. The idea, if you read the Campbell biology, you know that these ideas they talk about geology, and they were two opposite ideas. And if you read the Campbell biology, you will see that these ideas, these geological ideas, were important for Darwin to understand how natural selection appeared. So we have this one that says that a geological process occurring in the past can be explained by current geological process, and the opposite is this one that consider the opposite, that geological change can happen quickly, like with volcanoes. Okay, now in Darwin's thinking, the more closely related two different organisms are, what it will be the implication. So you have these five options, read it and just think about it. Okay, so the answer will be definitely C. More recently, more recently, they share a common ancestor. So for example, if you remember this is a phylogenetic tree. I will explain that in a second, and you will see that these two species are closer together. So as they are closer together, they share, they share, recently they share a common ancestor. So for example, these three, these one and two, are closer together, so they share an ancestor closely, yeah, more closely. While the species number three, they also share an ancestor, but one, two, and three, but it is not as recent as this one. Yeah, and if you read the other options, or some of them they can be true, all of them can be false, but they were not in Darwin's thinking. So, for example, less similar in DNA sequence. So actually will be the opposite. They will be closer in the DNA sequence, and Darwin didn't know about DNA. And if you remember the video of the artificial selection of corn, they have the same type of phylogenetic trees, and they have the same ideas, and they show that they were very similar. And same thing happened with the dogs. So they have a common ancestor with wolf. They have they were very close in terms of DNA. And then, okay, if they are more closely related, they have the similar habitats. This is not true. Actually, if you every time that you go to organisms that are in between a mountain, so the mountains during time start growing and growing, you can have organisms here that have a completely different environment than here, but the ancestor in the past, they can share, they can share they can share a lot of similarity at the DNA level. Even this one can be in this area could be humid, and in this area of the mountain in the other side it could be dried, but this is not related to that. So, and the same thing happened with all the other ones. All the other ones are wrong. The best answer will be C. And I want to talk about one key component of biology, and this is one of my favorite quotes in biology from Dobzhansky, that he says nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. So, for example, I gave you an example of agriculture, that we watch those videos, and to understand what is happening, how photosynthesis change and produce maize or the corn that we know, we need to know evolution. The same thing happened when we study antibiotic resistance, and now that we have a pandemic, we also need to know about evolution, in particular how these variants of the COVID are taking place. They use the same mechanism that we have described here. of evolution. Here, evolution is also important. And also, as I have talked to some of you before, in cancer, all these mutations that create variation at the cellular level that can lead to uh, generating cancer, all of them have something in common: evolution. So, uh, evolution is the field that allow cancer biology, agriculture, immunology, all these fields come together and be integrated. And it's fundamental to study evolution to understand, to be able to have food for everybody, to defeat the pandemic, and to defeat other diseases like cancer. So let me show you one of my favorite videos that show an example of evolution.
So what we ended up building was basically a petri dish, except that it's 2 feet by 4 feet. And the way we set it up is that there are 9 bands, and at the base of each of these bands, we put a normal petri dish thick agar with different amounts of antibiotic. On the outside, there's no antibiotic. Just in from that, there's barely more than the E. coli can survive. Inside of that, there's 10 times as much, 100 times, and then finally the middle band has 1,000 times as much antibiotic. And then across the top of it, pour some thin agar that bacteria can move around in. The background is black because there's ink in it, and the bacteria appear as white. First, you see they spread in the area where there's no antibiotic, up until the point they can no longer survive. Then a mutant appears on the right. It's resistant to the antibiotic, it spreads, until it starts to compete with other mutants around it. When these mutants hit the next boundary, they too have to pause and develop new mutations to make it into 10 times as much antibiotic. And then you see the different mutants repeat this at 100. And after about 11 days, they finally make it into 1,000 times as much antibiotic as the wild type can survive. And so we can see by this process of accumulating successive mutations that bacteria, which are normally sensitive to an antibiotic, can evolve resistance to extremely high concentrations in a short period of time.
Okay, this is a beautiful example of evolution. So again, you have a bacteria, and now you have different antibiotic resistance, antibiotic concentration, sorry. So in the extremes, you have a small concentration, while here you have a lot of concentration, and as a result, here you have a gradient of concentration. So in other words, you will have in the center something that is very toxic, and in the side something that is a little bit toxic. And what they show is that definitely nothing is going to grow in the middle. Well, it's something that slightly can grow in the extremes. And what you saw is that, as Lamarck said, as Darwin said, organisms can change. And if you, although definitely you will never see that a common ancestor from humans is going to change and lose his hair and start walking straight, because the life cycles are very slow. Here with E. coli we can see that, with bacteria you can see that, and we just saw it, that in several weeks mutations start appearing, and only the ones that were able to adjust to have mutations and then adapt to and avoid this very toxic antibiotic were able to survive. And here you can see how all of them have a common ancestor, and you can sequence the DNA and start seeing the mutation, and that some of them they went for paths that the mutations actually didn't allow them to continue adapting to the environment, while other ones allowed them to go to all the way, like this one, or here, and in the other way the same thing happened. What is interesting is that this happened with the COVID, coronavirus. This happened with tumors in cancer and with any organism. So, uh, so what we just described is the growth of the bacteria that become that as a result of the mutation they gain antibiotic resistance. And something that I have to remind you is something that is a phylogenetic tree that is called, maybe it looks similar to a family tree. Um, oh, and let me remind you that this antibiotic resistance in evolution, uh, this is just recapitulating the natural selection, that is that the differential survival and reproduction of individuals depending on the one that are best adapted to the environment, and that it is going to cause difference in the phenotype. So here you have the family tree, and a family tree is just a chart representing family relationship in a conventional tree structure. So here you have the oldest one, and here they had kids, and those kids got married, and they also had kids. And here you can find the different relationships, and you can continue going like that and like that forever. And something similar scientists do to find relationship or between different organisms. So here you might see that this tree conformation can also take place. So you have a common ancestor, and you start having later and later few generations. Yeah, and so that family tree, here you have only 3 generations. However, in here we can have thousands of generations. And the same thing we find it when we study tumors. So for example, from a primary tumor, the tumor starts growing, and you can go and sequence and see how the tumor move, for example, from the stomach to the lungs, to the brain, to different sections. So slowly you find that from a normal cell, you find a mutant that is going to keep mutating and mutating and mutating and changing to until it start gaining new abilities to invade other tissues. And the same process of evolution of mutation and adaptation take place. And these kind of things also can apply to the variants of the coronavirus. So you have a common ancestor, and if you remember the zoonosis, that it changed, that it's jumped from one species to another one, and then you can start following the DNA, the genes, and you will have variations. Some of them that it will make them more infectious, less infection, that it will be more lethal, less lethal, and all of them will be mutations. And with them, with viruses in particular, with these viruses, they are RNAi viruses, so these allow them to change much faster. So they make more mistakes when they are replicating, and as a result, you will find that this process will take much faster. So it could be they are random changes, and it could make the virus less lethal, or it can create that the virus became more infectious, and they are competing the different viruses to infect other people and see which one is the one that is able to succeed. So again, in all different organisms, evolution is very important, from agriculture, antibiotic resistance, cancer, and even in a pandemic. And same thing that we study here, that I just talked about the species, the example, Darwin did something similar, and you have seen his drawings. The same thing we can do it with dogs. This is just the same phylogenetic tree, or a type of family tree, but with a prettier drawing to make it easier to understand. And here you can see how similar, how different they are, and you can do this with different with DNA, with anatomy, with different things. But is this, you find the same type of, that all of them have a common ancestor? In this case was the gray wolf. And again, I know that for some of you, you know somebody that consider that Darwin is equal to Satan. And what I wanted to show you today is that I respect your belief, I respect, but I just wanted to show you that not all Christians consider that Darwin is Satan. There is actually many scientists that are Christian, and that there is no opposition between these two beliefs, or there is no opposition between being Christian and understanding the facts of evolution. That not every Christian think about that. Actually, many scientists like me that are Christian are also consider that there is no conflict between evolution and my faith, my Christian faith, and I'm not the only one. So, for example, this is a very important scientist that it was the head of the Human Genome Project who wrote this book, The Language of God, and so there is, for although there is a lot of groups, or there is a lot of people in the news that appear creating a debate between science and religion, in particular with evolution. There are many scientists that don't find any problem. And here I just wanted to show you this. I took this from Wikipedia. You can find so many sources, and I just wanted to show you that different Christian groups have different beliefs. There is not regarding evolution. So there are some that consider that the Earth is less than 10,000 years old and the universe is less than 10,000 years old. But there is our groups, the opposite group, like I am in this group that consider that evolution and that the age of the Earth and the age of the universe is the one that is proved by scientists, and there is a gradient of opinions about that. Yeah, it's not like there is one opinion. There's so many opinions. There are some that are that yes, that the Earth was created young. There are some that consider that there was a progressive creationism, and if you see, you can read about it. But the main idea is that if somebody taught you that all Christians shouldn't believe in evolution, actually there is a lot of debate about that. And although I have to be very honest with you, in science there is no debate about evolution at all. I will. I haven't seen the first scientist from important scientific background, or that has a recognized scientist that consider that evolution is not a scientific fact. So, although in religion there is a lot of debate about evolution, in science there is zero debate about it.